it's Roz. Now, how's your Jane Austen July going? Mine's been great so far. And one of the things that I've done is reread Emma. But I've also been enjoying other people's videos inspired by Jane Austen July. It brings out the best in lots of people. And I watched one from Claudia of Spinster's Library that was very enjoyable because it was about the female characters in Jane's novels that we love to hate. And her number one top choice for her love to hate female characters was Mrs Elton in Emma. And I know what she means, because Mrs Elton is she's not the nastiest, not the most dangerous, I suppose, of the female baddies in Jane Austen's novels, but she is one of the most enjoyable for the reader. A bit like, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, she's a really enjoyable one too, isn't she? Whereas some are more kind of like annoying or sinister. Like, say, Isabella Thorpe, she's nastier in my mind. Anyway, this got me thinking as to why is it that Jane is so good at creating characters that we react quite strongly to emotionally, that we feel like we know and dislike or are infuriated by or adore. And I suppose that got me thinking about how she builds her characters, how she lets us know what someone's sort of personality is or what type of person they are. And what is something that I think she does brilliantly, what she very, very rarely does is literally tell us. An exception, I guess, is the very beginning of Emma, a very famous opening line. It's not quite as famous as Pride and Prejudice, which probably has one of the most famous opening lines, one of the two most famous opening lines in of all novels, I'd say, the other one being Anna Karenina. But Emma begins, Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition. Now, literal description, unusual for her with characters. What Jane Austen usually does for us is she introduces and develops characters through, we observe them in action, we hear other people describe them, we see other characters' reactions to them, and above all, we see them through their dialogue, through their sort of their interactions with other characters, and how they reveal themselves. So she's your classic kind of show don't tell author, I guess, Jane. It's not a hard and fast rule. Some authors actually work really well doing telling. It's one of those sort of things like, you must do show, but yeah, no, she's a real shower. And so that got me thinking, how do we find out about Mrs Elton and her true awfulness? And what I realised, as you'll see from all the little bits of paper, is that in this book, is that it kind of grows on us gradually. So it's almost like we feel like we discover it for ourselves, and perhaps that's why it's so satisfying. So we first come across Mrs Elton, or Miss Hawkins as she was then, when we hear that Mr Elton is going to be married. And this comes as news to Highbury, and there's an assumption that Miss Hawkins is probably an excellent young woman, from sort of, everyone's excited, he's engaged, she must be nice, apart from Emma, who throws the first sort of note of caution in here, because she says, as to who or what Miss Hawkins is, or how long he has been acquainted with her, said Emma, nothing, I suppose, could be known. One feels it cannot be a very long acquaintance. He's been gone only 4 weeks. Now, that is interesting, because one thing if you read a number of all 6 or even a few of Jane Austen's books, is that although she has this reputation for being almost like the archetypal romantic novelist, she is not keen on swiftly embarked upon relationships. If you think about it, so just, well, in Emma alone, how long does it take Emma to work out that she's in love with Mr. Knightley? You know, like years, and certainly big chunk of the book. Emma doesn't approve of quick relationships either, really. There's a point in the book when she's talking about Harriet, and she says, oh, I think even, I can't remember exactly, even Harriet Smith couldn't be in love with 3 men in the space of 1 year. Lizzie Bennet is your sort of, well, her and Mr. Darcy, it's that sort of archetypal romantic thing of like thinking they hate each other and discovering they love each other. But it's not, you know, it takes time. It's not, and there's no sort of love at first sight there. Anne Elliot in Persuasion, she's the sort of classic long one, isn't she? You know, with the sort of years. But Eleanor Dashwood, it's again long. Fanny Price in Mansfield Park. And in fact, although with both Eleanor and Fanny it takes the man perhaps even longer to work it out, nevertheless, long. They know each other well before they're allowed to, you know, properly, before Jen allows them to be like a sort of a solid relationship that she's happy to sort of approve of. Even sort of fanciful, flighty, impulsive Catherine Morland. Yeah, actually, it's not that fast, is it? So, yeah, we have a note of caution about Miss Hawkins, but that's as far as it goes at that point. Yeah. Then the Highbury gossip mill gets underway. Yeah, and there's obviously loads and loads of speculation about the lovely Mr. Elton's very exciting bride-to-be. And as it says, so what does it say? Yes, a week had not passed since Miss Hawkins' name was first mentioned in Highbury before she was, by some means or other, discovered to have every recommendation of person and mind, to be handsome, elegant, highly accomplished, and perfectly amiable. Yeah, and Mr. Elton arrives back, very delighted with her. So far so good, also bland, and we don't really know. But what we very rapidly find out is that she's a woman of £10,000. She has a fortune now. There's immediately a sort of the suspicion that he's happy because he's made what's obviously a good match because she comes with money, yeah. But he's also, you know, full of her talents and accomplishments and so on. Now, Emma, meanwhile, seems to do a bit of espionage as far as we can work out, because she finds out a bit more about Miss Hawkins, not about her character but about her background, and you know, discovers that she's from like trade, you know, and although her sister's married well, you know, she's not on sort of Emma's level in society, shall we say. So yeah, but we don't know anything. We don't know anything bad about Miss Hawkins, Miss Elton at this stage. And you know, we have to bear in mind that, you know, Emma's going to be a bit partial, isn't she? So, you know, we the reader, we're not yet making any really firm assumptions other than she's rushed into a hasty match. Yeah. So, first impressions that we get when she actually arrives in Highbury. Okay, now, Mrs. Elton is first seen at church, okay, which does not satisfy people's curiosity adequately, understandably. It says, yes, visits in form, which were then to be paid, so they've got to go and do their sort of polite visiting because she's new in the area, to settle whether she were very pretty indeed, or only rather pretty, or not pretty at all. Okay, so still reasonably positive for all we know. But Emma goes to visit and we get her actual first impressions, okay, and she sees her as elegantly dressed, very pleasing. She did not really like her. So our view of her at this point is, you know, gossip says she's lovely, Mr. Elton says she's wonderful, but is he biased because she's got £10,000? And but Emma doesn't like her. Okay. She would not be in a hurry to find fault, but she suspected that there was no elegance, ease, but not elegance. In fact, too much ease. Now, this is where it turns out that Emma's judge of character is not so bad, because we're going to grow to know that, Mrs Elton is a bit too full of herself, as it says, too much ease for a young woman new in the area. Her face not unpretty, but neither feature nor air nor voice nor manner were elegant. Emma thought at least it would turn out so. But we're still bearing in mind, I guess, at this point, that Emma is not necessarily going to be fair to Mrs Elton, if you know what I mean. That's because, she wanted him to marry Harriet. So then we get Harriet and Emma discussing her, and Harriet feels that she's beautiful, Miss Elton. So, Harriet's view, in all innocence, is that she's beautiful, whereas Emma says that she's nicely dressed, but has a pretty fortune. So, again, so far so good. But then the return visit happens. And now we really get Emma's view, which is that she's vain and well satisfied with herself. Yeah. Now, at that point, we start to get, finally, to hear from Mrs Elton herself. Okay, so we get we get some dialogue, and this is when we, the reader, get to make form our own impression of her. Okay, and what do we get? Well, instantly we get that she is impossibly infuriatingly pretentious. So because she comes to visit at Hartfield, there where Emma lives, and all she can talk about is how it compares with her sister's house at Maple Grove, and the staircase at Maple Grove, and how the shrubbery at Hartfield is almost as good as the one at Maple Grove, and it's also so it's like she's ingratiating, but she's very, very kind of self-important straight away. And another little telling point we get is that Emma sort of is not that effusive, but it doesn't bother Mrs Elton, because Mrs Elton only wanted to be talking of herself. So our impression is being formed now, and it's not altogether favourable. Okay. Then we very quickly get another of Mrs Elton's sort of defining characteristics, which is that she thinks she knows better than anybody else. And we get that in relation to Mr Woodhouse's health, which is, of course, a kind of obsession at Hartfield. And she says, oh, well, he should go to Bath. She's instantly in there with the unwanted advice, and she just doesn't listen when Emma's saying, we've tried that already, and he doesn't like Bath. It's like, oh, but Bath's so wonderful, you must go to Bath. And I could introduce you to people in Bath. And so, irritating now. We know she's irritating, but we don't know that she's nasty. She could just be unappealing to Emma, but a perfectly nice person who's just a little bit trying to sort of establish herself in her new community and keep her end up, and sort of boast a bit about her sister's nice house. Well, that's all harmless, isn't it? Okay. We get gradually, though, we get a slightly more negative picture of her, that it's not just that she's trying to sort of establish herself and show that she's sort of going to be a worthy neighbour, a worthy friend, fit in with society, because, and this is one of the first times, and we get this again from her dialogue, which is she talks about Mr Weston. Now, we already, by this stage in the book, we love Mr Weston. Mr Weston is jolly and unpretentious and good-humoured and wants everybody to be happy, and, really nice man. And he's chosen, the lovely Miss Taylor to be his wife. So, he's obviously a good chap. Okay, so Mrs Elton says that he's an excellent creature. Yeah. Well, how dare she? Someone she hardly knows, and she tells Emma, oh, he's an excellent creature. What? Okay, and then, worse still, she then talks about Mrs Weston, or Miss Taylor as was, and how astonished she was to find her so ladylike, so very ladylike. It's like, oh, you could just imagine, Emma's outrage at having this kind of upstart woman call her dearly loved sort of friend come surrogate mother, surprisingly ladylike. So we understand now why it's reasonable for Emma not to like her, but maybe other people, she might think better of her. Her next big faux pas, though, is when she talks about Mr. Knightley. And what does she call him? She doesn't call him Mr. Knightley. She calls him Knightley. So she's like overly familiar. Yeah. But kind, nice Mr. Woodhouse describes her as pretty. Although she says she speaks too quick and it hurts the ear. Now at this point, the narrator sort of confirms that Emma's impression is not unfair, and we've kind of got that from the dialogue, haven't we? So you know that she's self-important and familiar and ignorant, and what we hear next about her kind of colours our opinion a little bit further, because she, after a few visits, she becomes quite cold towards Emma. Well, that's possibly fair enough, because Emma was probably not being particularly friendly, you know, she didn't like her. So, but what she does, and this is where we just start to get an inkling of her character through her behaviour, is that she's sneering and unpleasant towards Harriet, and that basically we're kind of told that what's going on there is that it's like she'd like to have a go at Emma but can't, because Emma's too important in the neighbourhood. So she sort of does it in a devious way by being horrid to Harriet. So now we're starting to know that she's not just irritating. There's a sort of a twist of unkindness about her, perhaps. But the next thing is that we see how determined she is to be nice to Jane Fairfax. Now that is there's nothing wrong with that, is there? You know, it's like how nice she wants to befriend Jane Fairfax, who's in a relatively kind of unfortunate position at the moment, as far as we know. But it is in a very patronising way. Like she says, oh, and I'm going to read you this bit again. She sort of talks about Jane Fairfax's talents and how wonderful, as if nobody else could possibly have noticed that before her. And then she says, oh, she's very timid and silent. One can see she feels the want of encouragement. I like her the better for it. I must confess it's a recommendation to me. I'm a great advocate for timidity, and I'm sure one does not often meet with it, but in those who are at all inferior it is extremely prepossessing. So basically she's saying that Jane Fairfax is inferior, but it's nice that she's inferior, because then I, Mrs Elton, can get to kind of try and lift her up. Okay, so it's not an attractive character trait, is it? But it's going to get worse. Okay, and this is where we start to see that she's a bit of a bully and quite insensitive to other people's feelings. Okay, and it's when she comes to the dinner party at Hartfield, and this is when, like, Jane finally reveals to us Mrs Elton's true awfulness. Okay, and it is through the dialogue. It's not through, you know, we're not told she's awful, we see it. And she starts out by being really insensitive about Jane Fairfax wanting to collect letters from the post office. Now, if we're clever, we might be starting to guess why that is. But certainly, you know, Jane makes it really clear that she wants to be able to collect her own letters. And no, she just sort of rides roughshod over her, you know, and tries to call other people in to support her in saying, no, Jane mustn't be allowed to go and fetch her own letters, however much she says she wants to. And, you know, but it becomes worse when she starts to really impose her will about finding Jane a position as a governess. Now, and you get an unusual amount of dialogue from Jane Fairfax at this point, and that is interesting because you kind of know that it's only Mrs Elton being so insistent and ignoring Jane's sort of polite reserved, discreet rejections of this proposed help. It's Mrs Elton's persistence that forces the naturally reserved Jane Fairfax to be as sort of assertive as we've never seen her before. You know, we've barely heard her speak before, in fact, and now she ends up in this dialogue where Mrs Elton is saying, you know, but of course I can find her a position. I will find you a position. It'd be wonderful. Yeah. And the more Jane Fairfax says, no, I really don't want it. Please, no, I'm not ready. Don't want it. Not interested. Please don't. The more she insists that she will do it, and that's the point at which we know we are talking about a really not very nice person, as kind of the rest of the story to an extent plays out. So that's enough, I think, for giving you a sense of how much I enjoy the way Jane Austen creates her characters, and you could do that with any of them really. But it's something to watch out for when you're reading her books. That process that she does again and again of letting you discover someone for yourself as a reader through their actions, other people's reactions, and above all their own words. Happy reading of Jane Austen, everybody.